Tokyo, 1943. Snow fell silently on the wooden streets as Sakura Tanaka made her way through the narrow alley. Her white makeup glowed in the darkness, her red kimono a splash of blood against the winter night. The wooden gaiter sandals clicked rhythmically on the frozen ground. To anyone watching, she was just another geisha returning to the okiya after an appointment. But beneath the silk layers of her kimono, pressed against her skin, were 3 pages of coded intelligence destined for American handlers. She had 20 minutes before curfew, 20 minutes before the military police would patrol these streets with their flashlights and their questions. 20 minutes to reach the dead drop location near Ueno Park. The okiya's paper door slid open before she could reach for it. Oka-san, the house mother, stood there with her arms crossed. Her face was unreadable, as always. Sakura-san, you're late. Forgive me, Oka-san. The general wanted another song. The old woman's eyes narrowed. Tomorrow night, we have very important guests. Admiral Yamamoto's staff officers. They specifically requested you. Sakura's heart stopped, but her face remained serene. She bowed deeply. I am honored. Don't disappoint me. These men hold the future of our empire in their hands. Oka-san turned and disappeared into the house. Sakura waited until she heard the footsteps fade, then moved quickly to her small room. She had to get the documents out tonight. Information about troop movements in the Philippines couldn't wait. American forces needed this intelligence now. Her real name was Yuki Matsumoto. 3 years ago, she had been studying literature at UCLA, writing poetry, falling in love with an American boy named James. Then her father had died, and her mother demanded she return to Japan to fulfill her family duty. She arrived in Tokyo in September 1941, 3 months before Pearl Harbor changed everything. The war had devoured her family. Her younger brother Kenji was somewhere in the Pacific, fighting on a destroyer. Her mother worked 16-hour days in a munitions factory, and Yuki had been recruited by a man who knew her secret. Her American connections, her perfect English, her access to the halls of power through the geisha houses. His name was Tanaka Hiroshi, a low-level bureaucrat in the foreign ministry who secretly worked for American intelligence. He had approached her in a tea house 6 months ago. Miss Matsumoto, I know who you are. I know about James. I know you don't believe in this war. She had frozen, teacup halfway to her lips. I also know, he continued softly, that you have the power to save lives. Japanese lives, American lives. This war will end someday. The question is, how many must die before that day comes? Now, 18 operations later, she was one of the most valuable intelligence assets the Americans had in Tokyo, and the most hunted. The Kempei Tai, the military police, had already executed 3 suspected spies this month. Their bodies were displayed in public squares as warnings. Sakura changed quickly into dark clothing, wrapped the documents in oilcloth, and slipped out through the back entrance. The streets were nearly empty. A few salarymen hurried home, hunched against the cold. A mother pulled her child along, both of them thin from rationing. The dead drop was a loose brick in a wall behind the Ueno shrine. She had used it 4 times before. As she approached the shrine gates, she saw something that made her blood run cold. 2 Kempei Tai officers stood smoking cigarettes near the entrance, their breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. She couldn't turn back now. That would be suspicious. She was just a geisha walking home. Nothing unusual. She adjusted her collar and walked forward with measured steps. You there, stop! She turned, bowed. Good evening, officers. The taller one stepped closer. His eyes were hard. Why are you out so late? Don't you know about the curfew? I have a special pass from General Nakamura. I was entertaining his staff tonight. She produced the forged document from her sleeve. Her hands didn't shake. Years of geisha training had taught her perfect control. The officer examined the pass, then looked at her face carefully. You're very beautiful. What's your name? Sakura, from the Hanamiya Okiya. Hanamiya. That's a prestigious house. His voice softened slightly. My superior officer often speaks of the geisha there. Perhaps I will visit someday. You would be most welcome, officer. Another bow, deeper this time. He handed back her pass. Be careful. There are spies everywhere these days. Even beautiful women can be traitors. How terrible, she said. I hope you catch them all. He laughed and waved her on. She walked slowly until she turned the corner, then her pace quickened. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. The documents felt like they were burning against her skin. She couldn't use the dead drop now. Too risky with the Kempe Tai so close. She would have to use the emergency protocol, a small bookshop in Kanda district, but that meant traveling across the city in the middle of the night, with papers that could get her tortured and executed. The bookshop was dark when she arrived, but she knocked on the back door with the coded pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. An old man opened the door a crack. We're closed. I'm looking for a book by Soseki Natsume. Which one? The one about loneliness. The door opened wider. The old man pulled her inside quickly and locked the door behind her. He was Tanaka's contact, though she didn't know his real name. They never used real names. She handed him the documents. He glanced at them briefly, then looked at her with something like pity in his eyes. The Kempe Tai arrested Tanaka-san this morning. The world tilted. Sakura grabbed the edge of a bookshelf to steady herself. What? Someone betrayed him. They're interrogating him now at headquarters. The old man's voice was gentle. You need to disappear. If he talks, they'll come for you. He won't talk. Tanaka-san would never. Everyone talks eventually, child. That's what torture does. He pressed something into her hand. Money and a train ticket. There's a safe house in Kyoto. Leave Tokyo tonight. This is your only chance. Sakura looked at the ticket, then at the documents she'd risked everything to deliver. Will these reach the Americans? I'll make sure of it. She nodded and turned to leave, but the old man caught her arm. One more thing. The intelligence you've provided, the ship movements, the troop positions, it has saved thousands of lives, both American and Japanese. Remember that, whatever happens. The train to Kyoto left at midnight. Sakura sat in a dark corner of the third-class car, her face covered with a plain scarf, looking nothing like the elegant geisha from hours before. Through the window, she watched Tokyo disappear into the darkness. Every light in the city was dimmed because of air raid precautions. It looked like the capital was already dying. She thought about Kenji, her brother. Was he alive? She hadn't heard from him in months. She thought about her mother, who would wake tomorrow and find her gone without explanation. She thought about James, her American boyfriend who was probably fighting somewhere in Europe or the Pacific. Did he still remember her? Did he know she was fighting this war too, in her own way? The train rattled through the night. Sakura closed her eyes but couldn't sleep. Behind her eyelids, she saw Tanaka's face, kind and sad, as he had been the first time they met. He had told her something that day that she'd never forgotten. This war is a machine that devours everyone it touches. We can't stop the machine, but we can save a few people from its teeth. That has to be enough. She woke to morning light and the conductor announcing Kyoto Station. The ancient capital looked peaceful, its temples and shrines untouched by the war that was consuming the rest of the country. But Sakura knew it was an illusion. The war was everywhere. It was in the missing sons, the empty rice bowls, the fear behind every smile. The safe house was a small apartment above a pottery shop. An elderly couple lived there, posing as her aunt and uncle. They asked no questions. In Kyoto, she would wait for new orders, if orders ever came. In Kyoto, she would become invisible, just another young woman whose life had been interrupted by war. 3 days later, the elderly woman brought her a newspaper. You should see this. The headline made her hands shake. Spy ring broken. Foreign ministry official commits suicide rather than face justice. There was a photograph of Tanaka. The article said he had confessed to passing secrets to the enemy before taking his own life in his cell. Sakura knew better. The Kempe Tai had murdered him and called it suicide. They always did. But there was something else in the article, a detail that made her breath catch. Police are still searching for his accomplice, a geisha believed to be operating in Tokyo. Citizens are urged to report any suspicious activity. They hadn't found her yet. Tanaka had protected her, even under torture. He had died without speaking her name. That night, Sakura stood on a bridge over the Kamo River and prayed for the first time since she'd begun this impossible work. She cried for Tanaka, for her brother, for all the people on both sides dying in a war that nobody wanted, but everyone was trapped in. A voice spoke behind her. "Excuse me, miss, are you all right?" She wiped her eyes and turned. A young man in civilian clothes stood there, concern on his face. He looked about her age, maybe a little older. "I'm fine. Thank you." He hesitated. "You dropped this." He held out a small piece of paper. She hadn't dropped anything. She took the paper carefully and unfolded it. Written in tiny characters was a message. "The work continues. New contact will approach you with the phrase, 'Cherry blossoms fall.' Stay ready, stay safe." When she looked up, the young man was already walking away, disappearing into the evening crowd. Sakura folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her sleeve. The network was still alive. The work would continue. Tanaka's sacrifice wouldn't be meaningless. Weeks passed in Kyoto. She worked in the pottery shop, learning to paint delicate designs on cups and bowls. The elderly couple treated her kindly but kept their distance. Trust was a luxury in wartime Japan. Then one morning in April, when cherry blossoms were falling like snow through the streets, a woman came into the shop. She was middle-aged, dressed simply, carrying a basket. She examined several teacups, then said casually, "Cherry blossoms fall so beautifully this year." Sakura's heart leaped, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, but their beauty never lasts long." The woman smiled slightly. "Some things endure beyond the season." She purchased a cup and left an address written on the receipt. That night, Sakura went to the address. It was a small restaurant near Gion, Kyoto's Geisha district. The woman was waiting in a private room. "My name is Keiko. I was Tanaka-san's supervisor. He spoke highly of you before his death. He was a brave man. He was a fool who got careless," Keiko said bluntly. "But a brave fool. Now, listen carefully. The Americans are planning something big in the Pacific. We don't know what, but Tokyo is mobilizing massive naval resources. We need someone inside those planning meetings." "How?" "I can't return to Tokyo. They're looking for me." Keiko pulled out a new identity card and papers. Not as Sakura Tanaka, but as Momoko Ishida, a geisha from Kyoto newly arrived in Tokyo. "Your story is that your Okiya was destroyed in a fire. You're seeking work at a new establishment. Different house, different identity, but the same access. That's insane. Someone will recognize me. Your face will be painted differently. Your hair styled in a different manner. You'll use different mannerisms, a different voice. Geisha are performers. Perform." Keiko's eyes were hard. "Thousands of lives depend on it. Maybe millions. The Americans are losing badly in the Pacific. They need intelligence about Japanese naval movements." Sakura thought about her brother Kenji, somewhere on a ship in that vast ocean. Thought about James, possibly preparing to invade some Pacific island. Thought about all the young men on both sides being fed into the war machine. "When do I leave?" 2 weeks later, Momoko Ishida arrived in Tokyo. The city had changed even in the short time she'd been gone. More buildings were empty, more people looked hungry. American bombers had begun their raids, though they were still infrequent. The new Okiya was smaller, less prestigious, but it catered to military officers. That was what mattered. Within a month, Momoko had established herself as a talented shamisen player and engaging conversationalist. She never mentioned politics, never asked direct questions. She simply listened. The officers talked. They always talked. Sake loosened tongues, and the presence of a beautiful geisha made them feel powerful, important. They boasted about upcoming operations, complained about supply problems, speculated about American movements. And Momoko remembered everything. She learned about the planned defense of Saipan, the reinforcement of Iwo Jima, the desperate fuel shortages that were crippling the fleet. She learned that Japan was losing the war, though publicly the government claimed victory after victory. The intelligence flowed through new channels: a contact at a noodle shop, a loose brick near a shrine, a bookstore owner who accepted coded messages hidden in orders for rare volumes. Then came the night that would change everything. She was entertaining a group of naval officers when one of them, drunk on sake and emotion, started talking about the Philippines. "The Americans think they can retake the Philippines. Let them try. Admiral Kurita will crush them at Leyte Gulf. The entire combined fleet will be there. It will be the greatest naval battle in history." Another officer tried to quiet him, but he was too drunk to care. "The Americans don't know what's coming. Our carriers, our battleships, everything. We'll destroy their invasion force completely." Sakura continued playing her shamisen as if she hadn't heard anything important. Inside, her mind raced. If the Americans were planning to invade the Philippines, they needed to know about the massive Japanese naval response being prepared. This could be the decisive battle of the Pacific War. She had to get this information out immediately, but security had tightened. The Kempei Tai were everywhere, paranoid about spies after several intelligence leaks. The next morning, she went to the noodle shop. The owner, her usual contact, was gone. A new person worked behind the counter, someone she didn't recognize. "Where's Tanaka-san?" she asked carefully. "He retired, went back to his village." The new owner's eyes were cold. "Can I take your order?" Another network member burned. She left quickly and tried the bookstore. Closed, with a notice saying the owner had been arrested for selling banned literature. Panic crept up her throat. 2 contacts gone in 2 days. They were closing in on the network again, and she was carrying the most important intelligence of her career with no way to deliver it. She had one final option, but it was incredibly dangerous. There was an American prisoner of war camp on the outskirts of Tokyo. Occasionally, prisoners were allowed to receive Red Cross packages. If she could get a message into one of those packages, it might reach Allied intelligence eventually. The problem was getting near the camp without authorization. The problem was the guards. The problem was that if she was caught, there would be no talking her way out this time. She spent 2 days observing the camp from a distance, learning the routines, watching the guards change shifts. Then she stole a Red Cross volunteer uniform and forged papers. It was amateur work compared to what Tanaka could have provided, but she had no choice. At the camp gate, she presented her papers with a bright smile. "I'm here to help distribute Red Cross packages to the prisoners. It's my first day volunteering." The guard looked at her papers, then at her face, then back at the papers. Her heart hammered in her chest. "These papers are dated wrong," he said finally. "Oh no, really? I'm so sorry. I'm terrible with dates. Should I go back to the Red Cross office and get new ones?" She bowed repeatedly, playing up the role of a scatterbrained young volunteer. The guard sighed. "Just be more careful next time." "Go ahead." She couldn't believe it had worked. Inside the camp, she helped distribute packages to the hollow-eyed American prisoners. They looked like ghosts, starving and beaten. It took all her control not to whisper to them in English, to let them know that someone was trying to help, that someone remembered they were human. She slipped her coded message into one of the packages going to a prisoner who looked like an officer. She had included enough subtle markers that American intelligence would recognize it as genuine if they ever received it. But she would never know if it reached them in time. The Battle of Leyte Gulf would happen with or without her intelligence. All she could do was hope and pray that her message made it through, that it helped in some small way to save lives. That night, she returned to the Okia exhausted and terrified. She had taken too many risks, left too many traces. The guard might remember her face. Someone might check the volunteer records. The prisoner might report finding a strange message in his package. She was right to be afraid. The Kempei Tai came at dawn. They broke through the Okia's doors with rifle butts, screaming for everyone to stay where they were. Sakura heard the commotion and knew immediately that they had come for her. She had 30 seconds. She destroyed the only evidence in her room, swallowing a small piece of paper with a contact address. Then she sat calmly and waited. When they threw open her door, she was kneeling in perfect geisha posture, her face serene. "Momoko Ishida, you are under arrest for espionage and treason against the Emperor." They dragged her out into the street in her sleeping robe. The other geisha watched in horror. The Okar-san was shouting that there must be some mistake. At Kempei Tai headquarters, they threw her into a cell. For hours, she sat alone in the darkness. Then they came for her. The interrogation room was small and windowless. 2 officers sat behind a table. One was young, eyes burning with ideological fervor. The other was older, tired, almost sad. "Your real name is Yuki Matsumoto," the older officer said. "You studied in America. You worked for the spy Tanaka Hiroshi. You have betrayed your country and your emperor. Confess, and your death will be quick. Refuse, and we will make you beg for death." Sakura met his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Momoko Ishida. I'm a geisha from Kyoto. There's been a terrible mistake." The young officer slammed his hand on the table. "Lies! We have evidence. We have witnesses. We know everything." But Sakura knew they didn't. If they knew everything, they wouldn't be asking questions. They had suspicions, maybe some evidence, but not proof. Not yet. She held on to that thought through the hours that followed. Through the questions that became accusations, the accusations that became threats, the threats that became reality. She thought about Tanaka, who had endured this and never broke, about the old man at the bookshop, about all the others who had sacrificed themselves for a chance at peace. She thought about her brother Kenji, hoping he was alive somewhere, about her mother, who would hear that her daughter had been arrested as a traitor, about James, her American love, who she would never see again. And she thought about all the soldiers and sailors on both sides, young men like Kenji and James, who were killing and dying while old men made decisions in distant capitals. If her intelligence helped end the battle at Leyte Gulf even one day sooner, it would save hundreds of lives. That had to be enough. That's what Tanaka had taught her. You couldn't stop the machine, but you could save a few people from its teeth. That had to be enough. The older officer looked at her with something like respect as they took her back to her cell. "You're very brave, or very foolish. Perhaps both." "Perhaps," she agreed. Alone in the darkness, Sakura allowed herself to cry, not from fear or pain, but from exhaustion. She had carried the weight of this secret war for so long. Soon it would be over. Soon she would rest. She never learned that her intelligence from the prisoner camp had indeed reached American forces. Never knew that it helped them position submarines that sank 2 Japanese carriers heading to Leyte Gulf. Never knew that Admiral Kurita, already nervous about American air power, turned back partially because his expected carrier support never arrived. Never knew that historians would later calculate that the Battle of Leyte Gulf, while still one of the largest naval battles in history, might have been even more devastating if the Japanese had achieved complete surprise with their full force. Never knew that she had, in fact, saved lives. Many lives, on both sides. On December 7th, 1944, exactly 3 years after Pearl Harbor, Yuki Matsumoto was executed as a traitor to Japan. She was 24 years old. After the war ended, when the truth about Japanese intelligence operations slowly came to light, someone found a reference to her in decoded American files. A Japanese woman who had provided crucial intelligence, an unnamed hero of the secret war. But by then, she was just another name in the long list of the war's dead. Just another young person whose life had been consumed by the machine. In a cemetery in California, there is a headstone for a young woman named Yuki Matsumoto. James, her college boyfriend who survived the war, paid for it. He never married. Every year until his death in 1989, he placed cherry blossoms on her grave. The inscription reads, "She chose love over hate. That took courage."